Okay, let's listen to Bill Maher and this clown by the name of Charlamagne talk about reparation, which is the most absurd thing that you'll ever hear anybody discuss anywhere. So Bill Maher asks this hypothetical question to this thug. Let's see what he says.
Last month, the Biden administration said, speaking of money, they want to study reparations. Study it. Compensate descendants of slaves for unpaid labor by their ancestors. Jen Psaki, the press spokesman, said, "We'll see what happens in the legislative process." I'm curious where you are on this issue. I mean, there's a collective guilt that's asking individuals to recompense. I think that's how we would frame that.
Listen, I think reparations have to happen for black people. You know what I mean? Because slavery was America's original sin. And I really don't...
Slavery was America's original sin. It kind of like, they talk from this point of view of religion. No, it's not an economic issue. It's not a social issue. It's not a political. It's a religious. It's kind of like, they want God on their side. This idiots. Let's go on.
I think that's how we would frame that.
Listen, I think reparations have to happen for black people. You know what I mean? Because slavery was America's original sin. And I really don't think no good is going to come to this country until they atone for their original sin, which was slavery. I mean, my ancestors literally built this country for...
Your ancestors did not build this country. All right, this country was built by white people. Let's get at that on the table. Slaves, they were just there picking cotton. And by the way, let's get something straight about slavery. The cotton picking things that you see on TV all the time, Hollywood has made a joke out of it. That was only like 2 weeks out of the year. The rest of the year, slaves were used to do other things. In fact, many of them actually were sort of part owners of land, and they produced. In other words, the slave owner actually paid slaves to grow produce and to build roads and stuff like that. It was an incentive. Believe it or not, there were many slaves that had money in the bank, or they had money. Many of them were actually rich slaves, believe it or not. There's the story of Thomas Jefferson, who owned like about 500 slaves. His chief slave was this guy named Jupiter. Thomas Jefferson actually borrowed money from Jupiter, his slave, to keep himself viable. And let me say something else about slaves, all right, before I forget. White workers in the North, working in factories, working in mines, in construction, they had it worse than slaves. That's right. They had white workers who really built this country. They had it worse in this country. Did you know that according to the historian Eugene Genovese, who was an expert in antebellum South, white workers actually lived 2.8 years less, all right, than black slaves. Black slaves actually outlived white workers in the North. In the North, you got to keep in mind that when a worker broke his leg or got injured or got sick, he was fired from his job back then. There was no workers' compensation. There was no health insurance. There were no unemployment insurance. Employers back then, they used to fire people like nothing. You got sick, you didn't show up for work, you were fired. And they had a whole list. They had long lines of people waiting just around the corner for somebody to get hurt, for them to take their place. If you ever seen the movie On the Waterfront, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, you'll know what I'm talking about, where people were just waiting for somebody to fall off the cranes, kill himself on the job. They would just drag him away, right? And then he would be replaced by somebody else. Now, these were men with families, ladies and gentlemen, who were treated like dirt. Slaves, in many ways, were not that worse off, okay, than white workers. And again, white men built this country.
Because original sin. And I really don't think no good is going to come to this country until they atone for their original sin, which was slavery. I mean, my ancestors literally built this country for free. So when you see all this money being thrown around, $27 trillion in national debt, $1.7 trillion for failed F-35 fighter jets.
$500,000 for dogs.
$500,000 for...
He said 1.7 trillion for F-27. He doesn't know what it's doing. The military budget is less than $1 trillion. It's about $1 trillion. So you don't spend 1.7 trillion or whatever the hell he says on just one plane. And this idiot, by the way, keeps repeating the same figure. He doesn't know the difference basically between a billion and $1 trillion. He really means a billion. A billion is 1,000 million. $1 trillion is a million. But this idiot, obviously, this ignoramus, from the ghettos of the world, doesn't know the difference between $1 trillion. You don't spend $1 trillion on one plane. That's the whole military budget of this country. But the idiot keeps repeating it.
Free. So when you see all of this money being thrown around, $27 trillion in national debt, $1.7 trillion for failed F-35 fighter jets.
$500,000 for dogs.
$500,000 for fucking dogs. It's like if you're black in this country, you have to be like, well, what the hell? What's up with us? You know what I mean? So for me personally,
What do you mean, what's up with us? What do you mean, what's up with us? So somebody has $500,000 to pay for a ransom dog. So what's your problem? It's just envy. This is all based on racial envy. White people are successful. They are not because of their lower IQ and violence and lack of civility. And then they say, what's up with us? Yeah, well, I tell you what's up with us. You lazy son of a bitch.
But again,
I don't even see what the issue is.
The issue is that's the collective guilt. But individual white people are saying, I didn't do it, and my ancestors didn't even do it, and you are not your ancestors.
I'm a descendant of those.
Oh, descendant.
Okay.
Hey, listen, when a debt is old, a debt is old.
A debt is old, period.
So you say you should get more.
I'm a descendant of those ancestors.
I know, but okay.
Hey, listen.
A debt is old. What the hell is he talking? Let me say something. Blacks in this country have a higher standard of living than 95% of the world's population. Africans today, they have a whole continent to themselves. Africa is 5 times the size of the United States. Richest continent on the planet. More oil, more minerals, more diamonds, more agricultural land than anywhere else on the planet. But they're starving to death. You got a whole continent. Rhodesia used to be a wealthy country when it was run by a handful of white people. Then the blacks took over, and now they're starving to death. Pretty soon, this is going to happen to South Africa, where they keep blaming white people for their failure. It's like they never look at themselves because they are incapable. This is a race which is incapable of introspection. Okay? They're incapable of introspection. And so they want to blame the evil ogre. Okay? And, let's go on.
When a debt is old, a debt is old.
Debt is old,
You've got a lot of money. You should get more.
Should I get more?
Well, no. You should get a check.
Yes, I'm 97% West African, born in Charleston, South Carolina. So I should definitely.
Okay, so he says he's West African, he's Caribbean, and so on. This is the other thing. A lot of this, reparation is pushed by these Africans that come to this country, and this Caribbean from Jamaica come to this country, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is America is racist. So what are you doing here? Pack your bag and leave. I can't stand these people that come to this country and the first thing they do is malign it. It's kind of like this black basketball players and black football players that the white man is willing to hire them to play for the team, and then next thing you know is that you're all a bunch of racists. The fans are paying for the tickets, right? It's absurd prices for the ticket, and the next thing that comes out of their mouth is the fans are racist. Really? So why don't you set up your own league? Why don't you set up your own businesses, okay? Or why don't you leave the country? If you think this country is so damn evil, then pack your bag and leave, you scumbag.
Definitely get a check. But if if it's to the point where, you know what, you make too much money, we don't think you deserve it, cool, give it to somebody who needs it. But to act like black people in this country don't deserve reparations is absolutely nuts to me. Hey, this is what I want.
You're nuts.
Put it like this, America.
You're nuts.
Just treat black people like they're F-35 fighter jets. You had $1.7 trillion to throw.
F-35, $1.7 trillion. The idiot, again, doesn't even know the numbers. So, here you have it. You're dealing with idiots. You're dealing with really incredibly low intelligence. The fact that we arguing with them is you should never argue with these idiots, because they'll never take you anywhere. They have this absurd way of thinking, absurd logic, and they're just it's like you're dealing with children in adult bodies. Let me say something. They're children in adult bodies. They keep talking about, back in the 70s, 80s, we want black mayors, we want black city council, we want black police chiefs. Okay, so they got that. They got that in Detroit, in Atlanta, in Baltimore, and hundreds of other cities. And what happened to those cities? They got worse. Nobody in their right mind would want to live in Baltimore, in Detroit, even Atlanta nowadays, unless it's a white neighborhood where you're safe. Black areas are the cauldron of violence, ignorance, brutality, rape, and murder. So you got what you asked for 1,000 times over. A reparation is being paid to you 1,000 times over through affirmative action, quotas, set-aside programs, special treatment. And what happens? You didn't do shit. So get the hell out of my country.